Dear participants to the European Migration Network, it's a fantastic opportunity to be here to speak with you about a number of migration issues. I'm trying to concentrate myself to the European space, as it says there in the title. So thanks very much for the organizers and the fantastic presentation. I also just wanted to say one thing, that yes, I'm here as IOM's Chief of Mission in Moldova, and I'm extremely excited to be here at this time because there is a very strong interest in migration in this country because of the demographic situation. Some 30%, 25-30% of Moldovans live abroad, but still gravitate very much towards their home country, want to create a better life for the people they've left behind, and have a strong affiliation to their home countries. But we'll be getting into this during the course of this talk, around 30 to 40 minutes, and some possibilities for questions, I hope as well. As you see, I'm trying to hone in on making sense of migration at the rim of EU's economy. I use this as a euphemism and trying to direct the attention towards how migration is generated and what is the background to migration in this region. And I just put out 5 different aspects here. We're getting to a point where the migration is of such a scale that you can speak about my labor shortage is your talent loss. And this will be a little bit of a theme throughout this discussion. We're seeing multi-directional migration. I was asked to speak about return migration. This is definitely an issue, just as the outflow from a number of the countries in the rim of the European Union economy. I also would like to say that it is not a side issue, a peripheral issue for policymakers in the countries such as Moldova, in Georgia, in Azerbaijan or the Ukraine. It is really something that is central to the demographic changes. And it is at that kind of level that we have to address it. So therefore, I would like to go into a number of experiences that we've had here in Moldova on how to create effective policies around addressing these kind of issues. So in this reflection, I would like to look a little bit at the evolution in Europe, thus including the European Union member states, but also the Eastern Partnership countries, that is Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia, but also the Western Balkans. So if we're looking at the European space in that particular perspective, there have been some initial intentions by the European Union policies in this regard. And in this reflection, I'd like to look at a little bit how it all turned out. There are a couple of turning points that we've been seeing. And again, as I was saying, now we are in the process of looking at these new approaches based on a number of experiences. And I'd like to present them to you during the course of this talk. So the main question that I pose for this discussion is here: how to approach then diaspora engagement, return and reintegration, and policies around that, programming around that. How do we look at that within the European space in the next decade? So we can see then along the lines of the EU's initial intentions, already harking back to the former years of EU enlargement, and then in EU's more expanded external relations with regards to migration within the Western Balkans, within the parts of the former Soviet Union. And this was a center and tenet that it would be a pan-European migration management continuum. And what we're looking at then is to harmonize, maybe not in the strict sense of the word, but at least getting closer to the EU acquis with regards to asylum, refugee protection. Readmission was a very important part of this work. The freedom of movement, and I'll put up a slide later to see what we have been able to achieve in that regard. I put a little bit of an asterisk here as well, because the issue of migration management continuum has not really only been confined to migration stricto sensu, but you do have a measure of quid pro quo in relation to readmission agreements and freedom of movement. There have been a bit of communicating vessels right there, but you'd also see that this has been coming in as conditionality in other areas, such as anti-corruption, the rule of law. It has a certain meaning in the area of migration, because usually it is confined in the area of justice and home affairs. But I think that we have to have a clear vision that there has been a certain sense of conditionality applied in this regard. So when we're looking at what has happened then in the last 2 decades, we've seen already from before the Eastern Partnership's establishment in 2010 that there was a serious increase already from the turn of the millennium. And we've been seeing over these 20 years a doubling of the indicators with regards to the movement from the Eastern Partnership 6 countries that I mentioned into the European Union member states. Now, the figures that you see there, these are people who have been registering as labor migrants as such, but as we know, the freedom of movement that is there with regards to the visa freedom, etc., the proximity, and let's say the continent being a highway in itself, we all know that migration takes place in various forms, and this is the main indicator, if you will, a doubling over the last 20 years, and certainly that is going to continue. Now, I wanted to show you a bit of the outcome with regards to this policy that the European Union has had. We've looked at very much at the visa facilitation or visa freedom. You see across the board of the Eastern Partnership countries that it has, to a large extent, been there. There is also the notion of mobility partnerships. These are agreements that have been concluded bilaterally between the European Union and the particular Eastern Partnership country, where there are commitments from the European Union side on continuing to have freedom of movement, visa facilitation under certain conditions with regards to asylum and readmission, etc., etc. The last column there is with regards to the single support framework, which are the individual countries' programmatic portfolios that are then administered by the EU delegation. And we've seen here that it doesn't dovetail perfectly, but you have in very many countries like Georgia, Moldova, Armenia, you have a significant presence of migration within the actual financial support with regards to programming from the European Union. So this is a couple of indicators with regards to the policy that was enacted back in 2010, with looking at people-to-people contacts and looking at the visa facilitation and the freedom of movement between the Eastern Partnership countries and the European Union. this has been established. What I'm showing here on the next slide is some quite important findings already back from 2014, and I think that these trends have actually just only been accentuated moving forward. What we're taking away from this report is that doctors that are trained in the Eastern Partnership countries go and practice in European Union countries in an increasing degree. There's a quote there regarding back in 2014, certainly the figures are much higher now, that in Germany there are around 2,800 doctors trained in the Eastern Partnership countries practicing in Germany. Similar figures we have in Poland and the Czech Republic. Particularly dire statistics we see in Moldova, namely that 85% of the newly minted doctors, they leave Moldova before even starting to practice in Moldova. Here, I just wanted to show two slides that is coming from the UN's Common Country Analysis. This is going to come out in our next analysis from the UN. And what this is actually not IOM putting out these figures, but it is something that is agreed by the United Nations country team. So it's peer reviewed by all the colleagues trying to have a grip of the most essential characteristics for development in the country. And the first paragraph there we see is that migration is of the magnitude. I was mentioning that in the beginning of the talk, that it is of such a magnitude that we're seeing its impact on population decline. So this is something that we've been able to be of a quite grave concern. It has gone into the common country analysis. The next slide I wanted to mention regarding this is that there is a vast brain drain. Here, one of the takeaways is that in Moldova, there is a 40% immigration across highly skilled workers. And you can say that highly skilled workers going to highly paid jobs in the European Union gives remittances. And we've been speaking about all of the blessings from IFAD, from the World Bank of remittances. But what we're seeing here is also that it can have long-term structural damages to the economy in the long run. So this is some of the issues that we need to take into consideration. So after having gone through the situation where we have it at the moment, we were part of IOM and the United Nations as such. We're part of a consultation with the Commission around 2 years ago, looking at the new challenges for the Eastern Partnership countries in the next 20 years. And I think it is important for us to note here that there has been a turnaround in EU's policy on the Eastern Partnership from the first decade being focusing on facilitating mobility, looking at liberalization of mobility, and looking at the positive effects of that. Now, 10 years on, also you saw that in the figures that I was just presenting, that there is a change in the approach towards this. So at the very highest level, the European Council concluded when it was characterizing and projecting its policy towards the Eastern Partnership 2020-2030, the next 10 years, we're looking at highlighting and promoting human capital development. And as we saw before, the unregulated outflow of highly skilled persons is very much to the detriment of the human capital development. You're also looking at issues on reducing labor immigration and brain drain. So we have already now seen in the programmatic policies from the European Union, the INDICI program, for instance, there is a very strong part there in its people's section looking at migration and development from precisely this point of view, looking at human capital development. I should have mentioned in the beginning that, yes, I'm looking at the last decade and projecting towards the next decade, but it would be wrong of me not to at least mention something about the impact of COVID in all of this. We certainly have been looking at that. We see that there are a number of labor mobility agreements being struck between Eastern Partnership countries. For instance, the one that I mentioned there on the slide, namely a labor migration agreement between Moldova and Georgia and the government of Germany. And what we're seeing here is that they have very many aspects of the slogan of build back better, but something very, very positive, because you're looking at beefing up. First of all, you're not only relying on, let's say, the freedom of movement and the spontaneous. Therefore, we have a lot of facilitators in the countries of origin, recruitment agencies, and everything that has in terms of lack of security. No, rather they're looking at basic standards, beefing up the pre-departure orientation, language trainings, and other protection measures in these kind of, I call them build back better agreements on mobility. The second one is that we are seeing in our surveys of the diaspora is that they are still very much gravitating towards the home country. We are measuring that around 26% of those we have surveyed, Moldovans in the diaspora, they say that upon return that they would be able to invest, they would want to create jobs. 14% said that they would be able to come back and start businesses. So again, we see this very strong gravitation towards the home country during a situation of COVID, and that is something that we really have to be aware upon and bank on that. So I'm coming to the part of the discussion is, so what are we seeing with all of these, with this situation, and how should we approach this issue now when we see that there is brain drain, skills depletion? We have a situation where there is an uncertainty with regards to mobility after COVID. And I have tried to break down the approaches that we are taking basically in three different areas. The first one has to do with the framework in which we're trying to work in, and we have to take into consideration a number of things that could support the work. Which are the areas where we want to work in? And then something that I will be trying to focus a bit more on is the increased sophistication of the issues at hand that we need to address, and therefore the role of expertise will be even more important than ever. I'll get back to you a little bit more on the details with regards to that. Now, first of all, with regards to the essential backstopping, I think that more than ever, again, when we're seeing that migration is of such a dimension that it has this impact on the demography, it has the impact on demographic growth, composition, et cetera, absolutely key will be statistics. I was almost a little bit shocked to learn that in the Moldovan National Bureau for Statistics, they did not really have the statistics on the diaspora as part of their essential population data. Now, you could say that the population data has to do with the residents of the country. The citizenry is much larger than the people who are citizens, of course. but there is a very much a focus on the domestic people who are registered within the country. But I think that we need really to, from a developmental point of view, we naturally need to look much broader and use the same rigor and thoroughness with regards to statistics and apply that to the diaspora just as much as to the resident population. So knowing the diaspora, what are the numbers, what are the dynamics? Are they short-term migrants? How many have been established there? What are their skill sets? What cohorts are we talking about? So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we believe that we need to look at the Global Compact on Migration process. So this is a global process that will be looking at a number of agreed objectives on migration moving forward. The next global review will be in May 2022, the first opportunity to report on a number of objectives regarding empowering migrants, their skills developments, acknowledging diaspora's importance, et cetera, et cetera. So having a very strong feedback from an international point of view. And then also looking at the role of the UN cooperation. All UN members have different kind of expertise, and we are seeing that migration is becoming an extremely complex issue. Therefore, there is not one agency that can deal with it from a developmental point of view, but we need UNDP, we need UNFPA, we need EFAD. EFAD, we saw you there in Moldova. It was great to see you. And we need you in the family. So come back to the UN country team. I just wanted to show here in the next slide that there is a product that we put together already in a collaboration between IOM and UNDP. And we call it the IOM UNDP multi-year roadmap for cooperation on migration and sustainable development in Moldova. And it's based on 5 pillars, one on the thought leadership, as I was talking about the data and the evidence, looking at the diaspora networks, institutionalizing these support networks and the outreach, and the opportunities for the diaspora, SME development, financial investment, looking at the relation between migration and climate change, and a number of other things that we have. So this is the new approach we find towards an integrated approach across the UN system, looking at the way that which the diaspora can play a role. Next slide, I wanted just to highlight the specific areas of support that also are reflected, by the way, in this roadmap that I just showed you. The first is, of course, the co-funding for SMEs, investment facilities, a return-friendly climate, that it is easy to re-register when you are returning. But also, again, as we were talking about, that the diaspora needs to feel that they have an engagement from a political point of view, from an enfranchisement point of view. In Moldova, for instance, the diaspora was around 16% of the electorate at the last elections, which is quite significant. They definitely had a very strong influence on the outcome of the elections. And the more the diaspora is given a chance to cast their vote, the more they will be engaged and feel that they have a stake in the future of their home country, naturally. So these are the areas that we are looking at right now. Lastly, I just wanted to mention a couple of words before I go into some conclusions, and that is the role of expertise. We see that the kind of policies that will ultimately have an effect, have an impact countrywide in the development sense, there is a need now for much more expertise than just say 10 years ago, because you really are looking at some technical products or outcomes that you need to be able to with a technical confidence be able to approach. For instance, we're looking at investment facilities, and we have been working with the Sustainable Development Fund that is looking at various ways in enticing the diaspora to invest, but from a commercial basis. That means that you will need a number of collaterals that come together from private banks, from a climate fund, because these investments would go to the greening of the economy. In some, what I'm saying is that certainly a lot of technical expertise is necessary to make something like that viable, but that is really the kind of an ambition that we have right now. Again, I was speaking about migration and population statistics. There certainly is a need to really bring this into the mainstream of population statistics in the same way, with the same kind of methodology. What we've been seeing in Moldova is that the collaboration between the border guards and the National Bureau for Statistics is absolutely key, because their information needs to be synced and done in a way that is effective. You need to have some kind of a method for disaggregating the people who pass several times the border with the actual number of people in the country. We are moving towards methodologies on that. We're quite proud of the progress that we've been making in that situation. But again, this underlines the needs for expertise and being as efficient as possible. Looking at the enfranchisement issues, how can the diaspora be able to cast their ballot in an effective way? Can we, as the UN, advise governments on this with confidence, knowing that these are the best practices, et cetera, et cetera? These are issues. So I put there 5 different areas for your consideration, and I think that they speak for themselves. Now, rounding up, I just wanted to maybe take stock with regards to a number of final thoughts here. And I think that we've seen here that we're having a bit of a different landscape than before of merely opening up, facilitating legal routes for migration, or on the other hand, looking at fair asylum procedures, being able to distinguish between those in need of protection, those are not, having effective border controls, etc. All that is still a key, and things that really are there and need to be adhered to. But I think that the main message from this talk is that we are moving into areas where we need to have much stronger expertise and bringing migration aspects into demography, into investment modalities into the country, looking at how climate change impacts, and in the previous speaker was speaking about the lavender field and how they were driving up. How does that drive migration? To be able to speak with that with confidence, we need real expertise. We need real ways in which to look ahead at the future with regards to this. But again, as in our humble way in Moldova, in the collaboration in the UN country team, we've been trying to put together some comprehensive approaches to these things and trying to raise the ambition as much as possible. So with that, I would be absolutely delighted to entertain any of your questions or any comments that you might have. As always, I thank you very much for your attention and congratulations for the UN European Migration Network for this fantastic program. Thank you so much.